This section is about how matter is recycled in the biosphere. We've talked about energy in the last couple sections and how it flows in one direction from the sun and then up through all the rest of the trophic levels. Matter recycles. Elements pass from one organism to another in these loops called biogeochemical cycles. So bio meaning living, geo meaning land, and chemical meaning relating to chemistry. And these cycles are powered by the flow of energy. Like I just highlighted, biological, geological, and chemical processes. As matter moves through these cycles, it's never created or destroyed, it's just changed. You'll learn that a lot. You'll talk about that a lot in chemistry next year. Biological processes include anything performed by living organisms: eating, breathing, burning food, eliminating waste. Geological processes include volcanic eruptions, formation, breakdown of rock, movements of matter within and below the surface of the earth, like earthquakes. Chemical and physical processes include formation of clouds, precipitation, flow of water, and lightning. Human activities have sometimes a really significant impact on cycles of matter. Things that can disrupt those cycles: mining and burning of fossil fuels, clearing of land for building and farming, burning of forests, manufacture and use of fertilizers. Again, just to re-emphasize, biogeochemical cycles pass the same atoms and molecules around again and again. So like in The Lion King, when Mufasa says, when we die, our bodies become the grass. They decompose. Our living things decompose. Nutrients are taken up from the soil by the grass. Gazelles eat the grass. Lions eat the gazelles. This circle of life. That's what Mufasa is referring to. First cycle we're going to talk about, I bet you're familiar with, the water cycle. Water molecules enter the atmosphere as water vapor through the process of evaporation. That evaporation can happen from the ocean or other bodies of water, or it can happen from the leaves of plants in the process of transpiration. If the air cools down, condensation happens. When those water droplets become large enough, they can't defy gravity anymore. They fall to Earth's surface as precipitation. So what we see here, the biological process down in the diagram, this is transpiration. Can't see that highlighting very well. Transpiration is what's happening here in the blue. And then evaporation, condensation, precipitation here is physical and chemical. Then we have runoff, where precipitation flows along the surface. This can be a problem. It can cause erosion if the runoff runs too fast. Precipitation can also be absorbed, and then it's called groundwater. Groundwater enters plants through their roots or flow into rivers, streams, lakes, or oceans. Some groundwater becomes part of underground reservoirs, which is what you see kind of right there. Then we have our nutrient cycles. Nutrients are chemical substances that an organism needs to sustain life. These nutrients build tissues and carry out life functions. and these nutrients each have their own geochemical cycle. These cycles are called the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, and the phosphorus cycle. Oxygen participates in them. Oxygen is released into the atmosphere by photosynthesis, as we've learned, and then it's used in cellular respiration. Let's talk about the carbon cycle first. So you see your different color-coded arrows: biological, human, geological, and physical and chemical. We're going to go through each of those. Carbon is the main component of all organic compounds. It's essential to life. So all of the 4 macromolecules we learned about way back in first semester, the carbohydrates, the lipids, the proteins, the nucleic acids, those all are mainly made of carbon. Carbon dioxide is exchanged through the atmosphere and through the ocean's chemical and physical processes. So plants take in carbon dioxide during photosynthesis, and they build carbohydrates. There's carbon in both of those. Then carbohydrates pass through food webs to consumers. Organisms release carbon in the form of carbon dioxide gas through the process of respiration. So that's what you see here, and then also here. So on land and in the water. When organisms die, decomposers break down the bodies, releasing carbon into the environment. Accumulated carbon can be turned into fossil fuel over millions of years and by the application of huge amounts of geologic forces. So that's what you see here, here, and then cycling down through there. That last one I highlighted here, that's carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere by volcanic activity or human activities. So you see human activities here, the orange. Burning of fossil fuels, clearing and burning of forests. Big questions about the carbon cycle. How much carbon moves through each pathway? How do ecosystems respond to changes in the carbon dioxide concentration? This is what I was referring to when we're talking about Too Hot Not to Handle, that video we watched, and the carbon dioxide that's being released by human activity. Is that making the blanket thicker? Is that making our climate change, the temperature warm more quickly than it has coming out of previous ice ages? That's the big question. Next up is the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen is necessary to make amino acids. Remember, amino acids are the building blocks of proteins, and they're also found in nucleic acids, DNA and RNA. Nitrogen gas is the majority of the Earth's atmosphere. What we see first in the biological process here, nitrogen-containing substances such as ammonia, nitrate, nitrite are found in soil, in the waste produced by many organisms, and in dead and decaying organic matter. So this is the biological contribution of nitrogen. Dissolved nitrogen exists in several forms in the ocean and other large bodies of water, so we see that as well. Nitrogen gas is the most abundant form of nitrogen, but only certain types of bacteria that live in soil and then on the roots of legumes can use this form directly. The bacteria convert nitrogen gas into ammonia in a process known as nitrogen fixation. It turns that, this is what we were referring to, it turns that nitrogen gas into a usable form, ammonia, so that plants can use it. Other soil bacteria convert fixed nitrogen into nitrates and nitrites that primary producers use to make proteins and nucleic acids. Then we go through the food chain. Consumers eat the producers, reuse nitrogen to make their own nitrogen-containing compounds. Decomposers release nitrogen from waste and dead organisms that producers can take up again. There are other types of soil bacteria that convert those nitrates back into nitrogen gas and release it back into the atmosphere. That's called denitrification. This is an interesting one. Nitrogen gas is converted into usable forms by lightning in a process called atmospheric nitrogen fixation. It's a very small amount of nitrogen fixation, but it's an interesting part nonetheless. Human impact is in the form of fertilizers. Humans add nitrogen to the biosphere through the manufacture and use of fertilizers. Excess fertilizers often carried into surface water or groundwater by precipitation, that runoff situation going on. So there we see an overlap of the nitrogen cycle and the water cycle. This is the phosphorus cycle, the final cycle. Phosphorus is really important because it's part of the backbone of DNA and RNA, that sugar phosphate backbone. So it's a huge, important thing. But it's not found very often or very frequently in the biosphere. Phosphorus is mostly on land. The phosphorus cycle doesn't really go up into the atmosphere. Phosphate rock and soil minerals in the ocean, dissolved phosphate and phosphate sediments. So on land, in the water, not so much in the atmosphere. With the wearing down, the erosion of rocks and sediments, phosphate gets released. Some phosphate stays on land and cycles between organisms and soil. Plants need phosphates. It's an important part to plants too. Just said that. Organic phosphate moves through the food web from producers to consumers and to the rest of the ecosystem. Excess phosphate can wash into rivers and streams where it dissolves. It can make its way into the ocean. Marine organisms can put it into their biological processes. What happens if one of these nutrients is limited? Primary productivity is the rate at which primary producers create organic material. If there's an essential nutrient like the ones we've just discussed in short supply, primary productivity will be limited. So the nutrient whose supply limits productivity is called the limiting nutrient. It limits the population. Crop plants are limited by one or more nutrients that need to be taken up through their roots. So when fertilizers are added, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium are contained there, helps plants grow better in poor soil. Carbon isn't included because carbon dioxide comes from the atmosphere. Sometimes we have micronutrients present in trace amounts, and those are included in specialty fertilizers. All the nutrient cycles work together. So if any nutrient is in short supply, the whole system slows down or stops altogether. Oceans are relatively nutrient poor compared to many land areas. And in this case, nitrogen is often the limiting nutrient. In freshwater environments, phosphorus is the limiting nutrient. What happens if there's heavily fertilized fields where there's runoff into an aquatic ecosystem? All of a sudden, there's a large influx of a limiting nutrient, like nitrogen or phosphorus. This can cause what's called an algal bloom, a huge increase in the amount of algae, other primary producers. If there aren't enough consumers to eat the algae, an algal bloom can cover the water's surface and disrupt the functioning of an ecosystem. Because, okay, we got plants, we got more plants, we're getting more oxygen in the atmosphere. Mrs. Roll, what's the problem? You got all the algae on the surface of the water, they're doing just fine. But they're not letting sunlight down to reach the aquatic plants down below. So now those plants die, and that disrupts the food chain that includes whatever animals are eating those aquatic plants below the surface. So the algal bloom, in theory, yeah, we got more plants, but it's not going to be good if it blocks out sunlight for the plants down below.